So again, Demo, thanks for dropping in today. Really great to have you on the podcast, and really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess the starting point, I would say, maybe is to really kind of explore what are the greatest misconceptions really that people in general have around the understanding of compassion, from your perspective, from your experience.
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, this is just my opinion, but there's a lot of different misconceptions. I think one that is really easy for a lot of us to have is that compassion creates feelings of overwhelm, or that if I am more compassionate, I'll end up depressed or discouraged. You know, like you're saying, there's so much suffering in the world. How do I look at that without feeling, a little bit jaded or demoralized? So I think that a big part of that comes from that misconception is because we often misidentify compassion to be just looking at suffering. So I think sometimes we look at suffering or we see suffering and we think that means compassion. Whereas from the Buddhist perspective, that's really just the start of compassion. Because compassion, the way we define it is it's actually a wish for others to be free from suffering or a wish to protect them from their pain. So I think sometimes when people feel overwhelmed, it's because they're just looking at the suffering and then, or they're just seeing it, but they're not actually taking that next step to think about others' potential freedom from it. And I think if we take that next step, it's a little bit easier to not feel that compassion is a depressing state of mind, or it's not so overwhelming.
From a Buddhist perspective, the understanding of compassion has a far deeper, more profound and profoundly transformative understanding that we can all, Buddhist and non-Buddhist alike, begin to internalize a little bit. And maybe we can shine a little bit of light on that to just give people some perspective of how it doesn't have to feel so hopeless and disempowering. In fact, you can maintain a deep sense of hope and inspiration and energy, even in this incredibly turbulent and often chaotic world.
Yeah. It's a magical quality of compassion where when it's present in our mind, these other qualities surface. Maybe we try to be patient or we try to be generous, we try to be kind. But when we have compassion, like kind of alive within us, those qualities just surface naturally. It's not like we have to try. It's just there. It's like when we have a lot of compassion for someone, we naturally feel generous towards them. We're naturally willing to do whatever they need. So many years ago, I used to do caregiving work, and there was a young man who had broken his neck and, needed kind of full-time care. And I was one of many people who cared for him. And his mother was also, obviously, he was living in her house. She was one of his main caregivers. And one of the things that I remember being so moved by was that she took such immaculate care of herself for her son. So she was so disciplined at, resting and eating well and getting the right staffing so that she could take care of herself. But also not just sort of physically, because of course there's a physical component of her wanting to live long enough and be healthy long enough to help him, because it required a lot of physical care. Being paralyzed from the neck down, people have to do a lot for you physically. So, she's taking good care of her physical health, but I mean also her mental health. Like she really was conscientious about doing meditation and doing things that were creative. She was an artist, so doing very artistic things and maintaining kind of her personal health. And so that she could show up for him, like, we like to say that word, show up for him, but like show up for him, like happy. Like I never knew a day when I was there that she didn't walk into his room in the morning, like happy to see him. She never seemed overwhelmed and tired. Like she always had things she wanted to show him or talk about with him, like keep him engaged with life. And I thought, all of those efforts to take good care of herself were for him, but it was that wisdom to know that she needed to take good care of herself in order to be able to do that for him. So he lived like that as a quadriplegic for, I think, maybe 12 or 13 years. And then he passed away. But what I found really kind of amazing was how healthy she was in that time. And then the week after he passed away, I was on the phone with her, and she had a cold. And she said, it's the first time I've been sick, in like 13 years. And to me, that showed how, the determination she had out of compassion for her son kept her maintaining her health. And then it was like, of course, the first week he passed away, there's a lot of grief, but also just that she wasn't in that mode of having to think that way. that it was like, okay, then she got sick, she got her first cold. But to me, it kind of showed the power of self-care and its relationship with compassion.
I think it's a lovely point, because what often people are getting upset with and depressed about when they look at the suffering they see in the world, and it is pretty pervasive, is they're focused on the suffering. Whereas we'll explore today, of course, is compassion really focuses on the solution.
I think the other thing is to see how there's some protection in it. That even in the moment in daily life, if we're trying to practice compassion, like we're learning, we're not like perfect, that there's a lot of ways that compassion protects our mind. I remember visiting with someone who had was in the intensive care unit after a stroke, and it was a very busy hospital, very busy ICU. And, I'd entered on the first floor. And so there's a group of people, there's a bunch of elevators, and a bunch of them were out of service. So it's just one that was working. So it took a lot longer to get on the elevator and get up to the different floors. And so there's a group of us waiting, and there was a couple nurses that had come down, I think, to get their lunch or something. They were carrying their food back up to whatever floor they worked on. And we were waiting for the elevator. We get in. And, it's pretty full. And then we go to the next level. And obviously people have been waiting there too. Like each floor, people were waiting for this one elevator. And this young woman, she kind of rushes in, and you can see she's a little bit tense. And then, we get to the next floor, and then she like rushes out of the elevator. And on her way out, she brushes by the two nurses that were kind of to my right. And the nurse to my immediate right, it like spills all her food, like all over her scrubs, like the soup, like just went all over her scrubs. But the woman didn't stop. She just like rushed out and didn't turn and apologize, just rushed out. And there was this other woman in the elevator, and she commented to the nurse. She said, "Oh, that was really rude of her. She should have at least apologized." And the nurse, without missing a beat, said, "Oh, no, it's okay. It's probably the worst day of her life. Like, nobody comes to the ICU because they're having a good day." It was just like her perspective. It was just immediately this perspective of compassion, because obviously she works in that environment every day. She realized it wasn't personal, and probably based upon what I imagine she's seen on a daily basis, it's not a big problem. And it just kind of showed me how there's such far-reaching impacts of having a compassionate habit, of just making a habit of trying to see things from a compassionate point of view or lens. Even if we're not really fully there, it still helps create some distance between maybe a negative reaction we would normally have in situations like that.
It's so powerful, that, because as you're saying it, I'm just thinking, really what she's doing is keenly tuning in to the fact this person's suffering and the nature of her suffering. And in this particular instance, she has so much experience of it herself that it just immediately causes that compassion to rise at quite a powerful level, because you're very keenly aware of the suffering of this particular individual.
Well, and I think, like you're saying, getting beyond ourselves, but at the same time using ourself as a catalyst for our compassion. So normally I think we focus on our own suffering, and then we kind of turn inwards, and we think that those sufferings are unique to us, and we use those sufferings to isolate ourselves, or feel that our suffering has more significance, or magnitude than anyone else's. Whereas I think if we can train our mind to use our suffering to connect with other people, it's so much more powerful. So it's like we can acknowledge the suffering we have, but instead of using it to collapse inwards, we use it to build a bridge to other people and think, well, maybe they feel the way I do, or maybe they've had experiences like I've had, or we're willing to consider, even if they aren't right now, they will in the future. Maybe they have in the past. And I think then that also, kind of going back to the point of compassion being healing, it helps heal us too, because we're like, oh, I'm not alone in this. This is actually an ocean. There's an ocean of others experiencing the same struggles. Even if it's a different storyline, it feels the same. It's empowering versus disempowering. And I think that's something that, what's the world benefit of suffering if we can't use it in that way? And then it's like we're turning suffering to our advantage, and definitely to the advantage of others, because we'll be more gentle with them. We'll be more considerate of where they might be coming from.
I remember actually, similar to what you're saying, is well, not similar, but I was in a hospital going to see a family member, and at the reception to the hospital, there was a sign on the window, on the glass window between the patients and the receptionist, and it said, Everyone is struggling with something you know nothing about, so be kind always.
Yeah. I think, for me, one of the kind of related to what you're saying about hospital, there's so many good stories of experiences we all have in settings where people are overtly suffering. But one of my most powerful experiences of compassion was in a hospital. And it was, I was in an ER, obviously my body's in pain. And it was, as all ERs are, very busy. And there was, in this particular ER, there was, kind of curtains on either side, but it was open in the front. It wasn't like actual rooms. And so in front of me, there was, I could see the other patients and beds in front of me. And there was a woman right across from me, and she was just in excruciating pain. I don't know what was wrong with her, but she was writhing in pain, just begging for them to tend to her. And, they're running around, they're busy. And it was helpful for me to kind of see this because, when you're in the ER, you're focused on yourself, right? You're focused on your own pain. And looking at her, I thought, oh gosh, she's in much worse shape than I am, and it was helping me to actually see her because she really needed help. But what happened, this is a really sad story, but what happened was then we heard all this commotion because generally the ER is very loud, right? A lot of people in pain, a lot of noise. And I saw this commotion coming in. Somebody, a child had come in an ambulance and was brought into the area right next to me, the curtain between us, the room next to me. And it was clear that it was a really dire situation. Like all the staff are running into this little area and you can hear them trying to save this child who'd come in really sick. And you can also hear the parents like screaming at the staff, like save her, like please save her. And they're working really hard to save this child who'd gone into cardiac arrest. And they couldn't save her. They're working for her in a long time, trying to save her, and they couldn't. But what struck me was that in that moment, the entire ER went quiet. Like there had been so much noise from the patients until that point. But in that moment, because we could all hear what was happening, we all knew it was a child, everyone went quiet and everything went still. And I was just so struck by, I think everyone was just moved. Like it was impossible to not just have this huge compassion going to that family and the doctors and nurses trying to save this child. But what blew me away was after they called it, they said we can't save her, and then the family's completely distraught, was that I looked at the woman in front of me and she'd become still. And I became aware of myself, and I was like, I didn't feel any pain anymore. There was no pain. And when I was looking at the woman in front of me, I thought, I don't think she's in pain. But something that shocked me in that situation was all that staff that had been going through this and trying to save this child, they immediately leave and have to tend to us. Like they just have to go back to work. Like they didn't even get a chance, and they just immediately have to start tending to us. And so this one male nurse, he comes out to the woman in front of me because she'd been one of the most desperate people needing help. So he went straight to her, to start helping her. And she looked at him and she said, it's okay, I'm fine. Take a minute. Like she showed him compassion. She's like, just take a minute. You could tell he was all teary. And he did. He just stepped out in the hallway and took a moment. And to me, it just showed me the incredible healing power of compassion, because what had changed? It was just our compassion. Like we all had gotten our minds to this place of very intense compassion through this very manifest suffering of obviously a child and the staff and definitely the parents, that in that moment there wasn't the sort of manifest pain that we were in before, but it had subsided. And it really intrigued me to think about in retrospect, because so many Buddhist meditations on healing, like a lot of healing meditations we do in Mahayana Buddhism, it have some strong component of meditation on compassion. And I started to kind of realize why, that there was this healing power and compassion that just through the force of a very strong compassionate mind, it was without a doubt reducing our own physical symptoms and pain. And it made me see it really is such a powerful mind to rely upon. And it wasn't just me. Everyone seemed to be, the woman in front of me, the man down the hall, all of us, seemed to have that reduction in our pain just by virtue of, being so deeply and genuinely moved by someone else's suffering and recognizing it was far greater than our own. And in that space, there was a completely different physical experience.
It's such a powerful story, and I guess like I'm reflecting a little bit again for people who are listening in, because we're talking about this very practical application of compassion in your everyday life. But I know, because when I speak to family and friends these days, the conversation always moves immediately to, look at this world, what a mess. And it's getting more messy as the days go on. We're in a very kind of turbulent period in our world. I mean, we've always had challenges going back. It's not unique to this period in time, but there's a unique kind of emphasis on how much the world is really struggling at the moment. We're struggling in many different ways. And what I often feel is there's this kind of quiet, almost unspoken sense of hopelessness.
I think that's something that compassion is really special with respect to, because it has vision built within it. Like I was mentioning at the start, the difference between compassion, sometimes people feeling depressed or discouraged because they think compassion means just seeing suffering. But from the Buddhist perspective, compassion involves seeing beyond suffering. So we don't have an ability to help anyone or an ability to really have compassion if we can't envision them having a potential freedom from suffering. So we develop compassion in Buddhism, say we focus on someone, we try and see how they're like ourselves, and wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer. We're willing to consider their suffering, known or unknown, their problems or pain, known or unknown. And then what we actually focus on is their freedom. Like it's a wish for people to be free, or a wish to protect them from their pain, because there is a hope. Like there's a potential for that person to be free from pain. And if they didn't have that potential, and we weren't envisioning that potential, compassion wouldn't be present. So the example that a lot of Kadampa teachers give that I love is if you are hurt and you go to the emergency room, another emergency room example, then the people tending to you, they're aware that you're injured, or they're aware that you're in pain, but what they're relating to and working towards is your freedom from that. Like if they can't envision you better, they can't help you. If they can't envision you free from that injury or disease or healing, they can't help you. And I think that that's something that when we're developing compassion for other people is incredibly hopeful, because what we're really trying to do is envision them free from that. I think it's not just a vision for others. I think it starts to give us a vision of ourselves.
I think it's like that understanding. I remember having this conversation with this Buddhist monk that I used to meet each year. Normally, whenever I'd have a chat with him, he was a bit flat, never particularly up or down, just kind of a bit flat. And this particular year, I met him and he was really, really happy, like truly happy, radiating actually. And I said to him, oh, you seem to be in a really good space this year. He said, yeah. He said, at some point this year, it just dawned on me, suffering is a cause that can cease. And I remember being deeply moved by that, because you could just feel it in that person, that the penny had dropped in his heart. But what he really was motivated by or energized by, I think, was he realized everyone I love has that same capacity, that same potential, can move to that same place.
Yeah, I think related to that, it's helpful, kind of thinking through just simple ways that we can change our way of thinking. Because I think that's really what you're describing about that monk, is he was able to just change his way of thinking. And just a simple change of thinking changed his experience and made him happy, right? And I think sometimes we might think, okay, I can't have full-blown compassion for people or certain situations, but can we think more compassionately, and just train our ways of thinking? Because I think then we're still moving in the direction of compassion, even before we can maybe have full-blown kind of fully heartfelt compassion for someone. We can at least be training our mind in the habit of thinking in compassionate ways. And that, I think, can really greatly improve the quality of the day, and the quality of our interactions with other people. This one monk told me a story of how he was at the deli in the supermarket in the US, and he said there was some sort of tension, like there was a woman in line and there was a long line forming because she had wanted to get this roast chicken, right? She had ordered this roast chicken and they didn't have it, and she was really upset. She was kind of like making a little bit of a scene, and people were getting kind of frustrated with her. And she was sort of insisting that, they find something or do something, and everyone's kind of thinking like, what's your problem, lady? And the monk was in line. He was just sort of observing this, and he said that finally she just ended up breaking down, and she said, I'm sorry. It's just my son has been deployed for almost a year, and he's coming home tonight, and this is his favorite dinner. Like, this is his favorite thing, and I just wanted everything to be perfect for him when he came home. And you could see, like he said, just everyone in line, like their frustration towards her just stopped. Like even the people behind the counter that, she'd been hassling, they softened towards her. And the monk said it was really beautiful. Everyone started wanting to help her. Like they're calling, because it was a grocery store chain. So people were calling other ones, like if they had roast chicken, or, oh, this one on this street, they have one, and I've asked them to save it for you. And people all started to kind of support her and corral around her to help her, because they understood that they could imagine or empathize with the fears she had seeing her son again, wanting to make things perfect for him. And just, it wasn't that it was saying that her behavior was okay, but it's people understanding why, right? Why she was behaving that way, and having a more compassionate way of thinking about her in that situation changed the whole energy in that place. And I think there's many opportunities in daily life where we can just think more compassionate thoughts or not assume the opposite. And that can have an impact, on us, but also the people around us.
Yeah, we see so many examples of, negativity and destruction in the world. But if we just open our hearts a little bit, we'll probably see what the world would be like if more people just tried.
Yeah. I think there's also an element, too, where when we can't have compassion, to just be willing to observe other people's compassion and the impact it has. Because I think some days we just, we're just like, I can't do it. It's just not, I don't have it in me today. And that's okay. But to maybe make even a practice of trying to notice other people's compassion, because I think that the more inspired we are by other people's acts of compassion, the more it also starts to ripen our own potential for it.
Again, Demo, thanks a million for dropping in today. Really enjoyed that chat.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a joy.